please. Just before we begin with the daily routine, I'll read a statement here from myself, the Speaker, before we begin. I want to report to the House the outcome of the warrant I issued on Friday pursuant to the direction of the House contained in Resolution 2455 dated November 19, 2015. Yesterday morning, the member for Dartmouth East delivered 3 items to the Chief Clerk of the House. The first was a compact disc. The other 2 were a letter and an affidavit. The letter and affidavit explained that notwithstanding the member's affidavit and advice to the House on Friday that there were no recordings of a conversation between him and the Premier's Chief of Staff on February the 12th, 2015, other than the 2 he had previously provided to the Chief Clerk, he had since been able to locate the file containing the entire recording he had made. He advised that a file was found on Sunday afternoon on a cloud backup system he had not previously considered and as a possible location for the recording, and that the file contained the entire recording he had made of that conversation. Given the member's sworn affidavit that he has provided the entire recording sought by my warrant, I conclude that the warrant has been complied with. We'll now move on to the daily routine, beginning with presenting and reading of petitions. Presenting reports of committees. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, as Chair of the Committee on Law Amendments, I'm directed to report that the committee has met and considered the following bills. Bill number 122, an act to amend Chapter 9 of the Acts of 2002, the Interjurisdictional Support Orders Act. Bill number 123, an act respecting the practice of paramedicine. Bill number 124, an act to amend Chapter 12 of the Acts of 1993, the Social Workers Act. Bill number 126, an act to amend Chapter 37 of the Acts of 2014, the Pooled Registered Pension Plans Act. The committee recommends these bills to the favourable consideration of the House without any amendments.
Order that these bills be referred to the Committee on Whole House on Bills. The Honourable Member for Kings South. We'll now move on to tabling reports, regulations, and other papers. The Honourable Member for Kings South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to table the 2015 annual report of the Standing Committee on Human Resources.
The report is tabled. Statements by ministers. Government notices of motion. The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas during the month of November, Adoption Awareness Month, public attention will be focused on the need for adoptive families for children and youth in the permanent care of the Minister of Community Services. Whereas children over the age of 8, children with African Nova Scotia or Mi'kmaq heritage, sibling groups, and children with special needs are waiting for a permanent loving home through adoption, and whereas adoptive families across the province have chosen to provide loving support in traditional same-sex and single-parent families, therefore be it resolved that all members of this House commend adoptive parents across the province as an inspiration for others to follow. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? It is agreed. Would all those in favour of the motion please say aye? Aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Immigration.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Canada has pledged to take in 25,000 refugees from the Syrian crisis, and Nova Scotians have shown they are caring and compassionate people who are willing to offer our hearts, homes, and communities for refugees. Whereas unprecedented cooperation is taking place between the Nova Scotia Government and our partners, immigration settlement providers, municipal leaders, and other stakeholders to prepare for the arrival of these refugees. Whereas on November 17th, I was pleased as Minister of Immigration to announce that 211 would coordinate offers of support, including clothing, food, lodging, financial support, and most importantly, volunteer support for Syrian refugees. And as of November 22nd, nearly 890 offers of assistance have been made. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this legislature encourage their constituents, friends, and families to support Nova Scotia's efforts to welcome refugees and use the opportunity to pledge their assistance through 211. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? It is agreed. Would all those in favor of the motion please say aye. Contrary minded, nay. Motion is carried. We'll now move on to introduction of bills. The Honourable Minister of Municipal Affairs.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to move to table a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 71 of the Acts of 1993, the Community of Sackville Landfill Compensation Act.
The Honourable Minister of Municipal Affairs begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 71 of the Acts of 1993, the Community of Sackville Landfill Compensation Act.
Bill number 130, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 71 of the Acts of 1993, the Community of Sackville Landfill Compensation Act.
Ordered that the bill be read a second time on a future day. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 160 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Maintenance and Custody Act. Thank you.
The Honourable Minister of Justice begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 160 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Maintenance and Custody Act.
Bill number 131, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 160 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Maintenance and Custody Act.
Ordered that the bill be read a second time on a future day. The Honourable Member for Halifax Needham.
Much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, before I introduce my bill, could I be permitted to make an introduction, please?
Permission granted.
Thank you very much. Mr. Speaker and members of the legislature, I'd like to draw your attention to the, is it the West Gallery? The West Gallery. The West Gallery, where we're joined today by friends of mine, I believe, who are probably constituents of the member from Waverly Fall River, an old high school colleague of mine who I only connect with on Facebook, and her husband are here today watching the proceedings. And I would like them to rise, Scott McKay, Marlene Fugere, and receive the warm welcome of our legislature, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Needham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to table a bill entitled An Act to Establish a Financial Accountability Officer for Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Needham begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Establish a Financial Accountability Officer for Nova Scotia.
Bill number 132, entitled An Act to Establish a Financial Accountability Officer for Nova Scotia.
Ordered that the bill be read a second time on a future day. We'll now move on to notices of motion. Statements by members. The Honourable Member for Bedford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd just like to take a moment, may I beg leave to make an introduction?
Permission granted.
I would like to draw the members' attention to the, I think, East Gallery, to Ms. Doris Robbins, who is a constituent of mine, who is involved in many things, her church, the Liberal Party, and recently ran my husband's campaign. So I would like to ask the members of the House to give her a warm welcome. The
Honourable Member for Waverly, Beaverbank, Fall River.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to congratulate Stonewater Homes of Fall River. They are winners of the 2014 Builder of the Year in Nova Scotia and ranked as one of Canada's fastest growing companies by Profit 500. Stonewater Homes have excelled in providing all-inclusive turnkey homes over the past 9 years and has experienced a growth rate of 202%, which continues to grow. James Cowan, Editor-in-Chief of Profit and the Canadian Business, said in a release, the Profit 500 represents the highest tier of entrepreneurialism in Canada. He acknowledged Stonewater Homes for their economic contributions and their communities and the entire country through their innovation, discipline, and determination. Please join me in congratulating Stonewater Homes for their success. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Kings North.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday, members of Nova Scotia's vibrant Lebanese community celebrate Lebanon's Independence Day at the Demand Lebanese Centre. I was pleased to celebrate with them. Lebanese Independence Day is a national holiday that commemorates the end of the French colonial rule in the country in 1943. In Nova Scotia, our Lebanese community is strong with deep roots in our communities. Members of the Lebanese community have made important contributions to the cultural and economic life of the province. We are a richer province because of it. I am proud to stand to wish our Lebanese community a happy Independence Day and thank them for the wonderful impact the community has had on our province. Thank you.
The honourable member for Halifax Needham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this week marks HIV/AIDS Awareness Week, culminating on December the 1st, World AIDS Day. This week, we honor those living with HIV and AIDS, and also those who have lost their lives fighting the disease. New research shows us that early and lifelong use of HIV drug treatment leads to better health and a near normal life expectancy. Mr. Speaker, however, there is still much work to be done. In Canada, an estimated 71,300 people are living with HIV, and almost 1 in 4 of those individuals are women. Mr. Speaker, we all must challenge ourselves and others to rethink outdated stereotypes and challenge myths about HIV and AIDS so that all Nova Scotians can live in healthy, equitable, and inclusive communities. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Halifax-Chebucto.
Mr. Speaker, Margaret Armour, co-owner of Aerobics First, was awarded the Quimple Road Main Street District Association Chairman Award at their association's annual general meeting. This is the 3rd year the association has awarded a business owner in the district with this prestigious award. Margaret has been a QRMDA board for the last 3 years and has played a vital role on many community, including the facade improvement, tax reform, and the nomination committee. Margaret has been a very supportive colleague of her fellow business owners on Quimple Road and is one of the biggest champions for this street. Her work on the facade improvement committee has made a huge improvement. She is a true business leader. Margaret has a degree from Dalhousie and is a former teacher with the Halifax Regional School Board. She is very active in the community and sits on many other boards, including Motion Dance and Loans Review Committee for the SEED. She was also awarded the 1994 Canadian Women Entrepreneur of the Year Award, turnaround category, and involved with ACOA. Margaret is a mentor to many in both business, life, and is an inspiration to many.
The honourable member for Argyle-Barrington.
Mr. Speaker, this week is HIV/AIDS Awareness Week in Canada, a week that ends on World AIDS Day on December 1st. This is an opportunity to raise awareness about the spread of the HIV virus and to support those living with HIV or AIDS, and to commemorate those who have died from this illness. It is a time for reflection about what has been accomplished in the fight against the disease and how much more is yet to be achieved. On a national scale, an estimated 71,300 Canadians were living with HIV, and an estimated 3,175 new HIV infections occurred in 2011. The theme for World AIDS Day is this year is getting to zero. 0 new HIV infections, 0 discrimination, and 0 AIDS-related deaths. Through events like HIV/AIDS Awareness Week, we can raise awareness and help achieve the 0 goal. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Sackville-Cobequid.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Premier needs to show public sector workers of this province some good faith and stop interfering in the collective bargaining process. How will attacking workers' rights help the government keep emergency rooms open? How will strong-arm tactics help us recruit more doctors? How will floating the trial balloon of legislating teachers' contracts help improve kids' test scores? First, the Premier passed legislation taking away the hard-won rights of home care workers. Then he took away collective bargaining rights for all healthcare workers. Now the Premier has set his sights on teachers, medical residents, and the public service. That's not good labour relations, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
The honourable member for Halifax-Armdale.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was glad to have participated in the October Mobile Wellness Clinic sponsored by the Loblaw Pharmacy at No Frills in Spryfield. Pharmacist and constituent Noel David, together with the mobile clinic team, were administering flu shots at the Walter Havel location. My daughter and I both received our flu shots with big smiles. Vaccination is the safest and most effective way to protect ourselves and loved ones from the flu. Seasonal flu vaccine is available from most pharmacies, family doctors, nurse practitioners, workplaces, and through clinics offered by some public health offices. I'd like to thank Ms. David and the No Frills Loblaw Pharmacy for their commitment to the community and for kindly helping me and my daughter to get our flu shots this year with a smile, cookie, and fruit drink in a friendly atmosphere. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Pictou East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to acknowledge a true gentleman who I consider to be an outstanding citizen, a man who is generous of spirit and time, and a person that I am proud to call a friend, Mr. Doug Porter of Westville. Doug is quick to volunteer his services, regardless of the task, and he never rests until the job is complete. In the years I have known Doug, he has proven to be dependable, considerate, loyal, and generous to a fault. Mr. Speaker, Doug celebrates a significant birthday this week, and I want to wish him good health and happiness and thank him for his friendship. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Queens Shelburne.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, this Monday, November the 3rd, marks the starting date for our commercial lobster fishery in southwest Nova Scotia. Seafood is a big business in Canada. Last year, Canada's largest export by species were lobster, snow, queen crab, shrimp, and farm Atlantic salmon. The lobster industry is a vital sector of the commercial economy. From pricing to marketing to concerns over the offshore drilling, the industry has not been without its share of challenges. I encourage the Minister of Fisheries and Agriculture to work with the industry to help overcome these challenges, and I wish all fishers a safe and prosperous season. Thank you.
The honourable member for Cole Harbour, Portland Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, may I have permission to do an introduction, please, to the East Gallery?
Permission granted.
Thank you. It is my pleasure to introduce two Nova Scotian entrepreneurs and to share their exciting news. Our visitors up in the East Gallery are Kathleen Quinlan and Phaedra Charlton Huskins, owners of Fiora Botanical, a company that produces natural handmade skincare products. Now, Mr. Speaker, I'd like the host to just give a warm welcome, please, of our guests.
The honourable member for Lunenburg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to congratulate two exceptionally talented women, Kathleen Quinlan and Phaedra Carlton Huskins, whose Fiora Botanica line of skin care products will be featured at the Golden Globes this January and given to nominees and presenters alike. The two have their story showcased on the front page of the Chronicle Herald and were honoured last week in Toronto at the annual RBC Canadian Women Entrepreneur Awards for once again placing in the top 200 of 5,000 nominated businesses. We in Lunenburg are so proud and happy to have Fiora Botanica operating within the town and showcasing us the international stage. I wish Ms. Quinlan and Ms. Carlton Huskins the very best as they venture to Hollywood and many years of continued success in our community. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Pictou Centre.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to acknowledge one of the most gifted athletes ever produced in Pictou County. Nelson Wilson, at the age of 15, left his high school team to join the Sullerton Royals of the APC Senior Hockey League, playing alongside many players twice his age. His discipline, competitiveness, self-confidence, and commitment to his teams demonstrated a high degree of sport intelligence. Fans from his era would marvel at his skills. His hitting prowess while playing softball with the Trenton Scotians or baseball with the Stellarton Albions and Stellarton Keiths was simply outstanding. He played on numerous provincial and maritime championship teams in multiple sports. Teammates and rival athletes from across the province knew that if this former hockey, baseball, and softball star wanted to play in the National Hockey League with one of the original six, it was just a matter of showing up at their training camp. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Truro, Bible Hill, Millbrook, Salmon River.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Les Mullins and Trevor Boyd, two local teachers in Truro, hosted the Chignecto Central Regional School Board's What's in Your Backpack theme of Stand Up, Speak Out Day of Action, promoting healthy relationships at Truro Junior High School. The event was live-streamed to other schools in the region. The anti-bullying initiative was aimed at the invisible backpacks people carry with them, containing things like gender, sexual orientation, class, abilities, and race. A check from the Director of Education Services was presented to TJHS for its successful Stand Up, Speak Out Student Action Grant application, and this grant is available to schools across the board to promote a positive school climate. So I'd just like to take this opportunity to congratulate these two teachers and also to the students of Truro Junior High School who took part in the event. Thank you.
The honourable member for Glace Bay on an introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to draw the House's attention to the East Gallery where we have Miss Catherine McDonald. Catherine's a marketing director at Destination Cape Breton. She's in town for the Tie-Ins Conference. Lady Kay, as we all know her, is a great friend and a true professional in Cape Breton. We're always happy to have her here in the city. I'd like to ask the House to ask Catherine to rise and let the House give her a warm, warm round of applause. Lady Kay, everybody!
The honourable member for Lunenburg West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to take a few moments to speak to you about the opening of the Journey Room. The opening took place October the 30th after a successful fundraising campaign by Health Services Foundation. A combination of the annual Radiothon, which raised $155,000, and the annual David Atkinson Memorial Bonspiel for Cancer have made possible a space for the cancer patients and families of Lunenburg and Queens counties to access helpful resource in one space. The Journey Room, one of only 4 in the province, is located at the South Shore Regional Hospital in Bridgewater. It has become a true community endeavour with more than 1,000 individuals and businesses contributing. I'd like to thank all who gave time to make this valuable space a reality. For all those who have been touched by cancer, know that a room such as the Journey Room will go a long way to alleviate some of the stress of a cancer diagnosis. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Colchester, Musquodoboit Valley.
Mr. Speaker, the Order of Merit of the Police Forces is a fellowship of honour based on the highest qualities of citizenship, service to Canada, to the police community, and to humanity at large. On September the 18th, Governor-General David Johnston presented Inspector Lindsay Herndon, a Shorts Lake resident, with the Order of Merit. With 27 years of service in the Halifax Regional Police, Inspector Herndon has certainly earned his honour. His list of accomplishments are extensive, but as an example, he has been instrumental in the development and implementation of many programs such as the Emergency Response Team Basic Training Program. This particular knowledge and skill set was tested this past summer when his quick actions assisted in saving the life of his own father-in-law. I wish to congratulate Inspector Herndon on receiving this great honour and thank him for his years of service. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Dartmouth South.
Mr. Speaker, November 22nd of each year marks National Housing Day. On November 22nd in 1998, the Canadian Federation of Municipalities declared homelessness a national disaster. Unfortunately, 17 years later, Nova Scotia still faces an affordable housing crisis. Across Nova Scotia, 4,700 households are waiting for seniors and public housing, and last year, 1,500 individuals stayed in shelters in the HRM.
Mr. Speaker, research has shown again and again that the most cost-effective way to save money in the areas of health and wellness and community services is by ensuring a safe and affordable place for people to live. Investing in affordable housing now is something Nova Scotia can't afford not to do. Thank you.
The honourable member for Fairview Clayton Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to recognize Melissa Gadet from the Dumbrack Soccer Club for outstanding work in the community, both as a soccer player and as a coach. On August 23rd, Melissa came out to my community soccer game and was able to bring her soccer expertise to the field. She was a real asset in helping to organize the children's soccer game in both a fun and safe manner. Her positive and energetic attitude helped make the day a great success. Through you, Mr. Speaker, I would like to thank Melissa for her dedication to our community, her passion for sport, and for helping make the day fun and laughter-filled. Thanks.
The honourable member for Northside Westmount.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to congratulate the Clifford Street Youth Centre in North Sydney. The centre received one of 6 national grants from the World Wildlife Fund of Canada to sponsor Go Wild events. A mini Jeopardy was held with many community teams and was won by the Youth Centre. The great event was capped off with a barbecue and a sliming of selected individuals from other teams. It's a true honour to have this opportunity to thank the organisers of this event that allowed children to engage with the community. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Chester St. Margaret's.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm hearing from countless teachers in Chester St. Margaret's who are saying they feel bullied by the McNeil government. They're saying that for a government who boasts of being the most open and transparent in history, teachers are experiencing something altogether different. They're experiencing a McNeil government who is closed off and dictatorship. Healthcare and home care providers have been on the receiving end of this government's cold shoulder for more than 2 years, and now teachers have been added to the fray. Since the McNeil government formed government in 2013, they've been openly strong-arming workers in our province, and it looks as though those bullying tactics are beginning to rear their head at the bargaining table.
Order, please. The term bullying is an unparliamentary term, and I also want to remind the member not to refer to the current government as the McNeil government. The honourable member for Antigonish.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Martha Brown was recognized as our 2015 Woodland Owner of the Year for the Eastern Region. She was also the overall provincial winner, making her the first sole female provincial winner in the Woodland Owner of the Year. The Woodlot Owner of the Year Award recognizes outstanding woodland stewards while encouraging sustainable woodland management. Recipients of the award are nominated by their peers, and all nominations are evaluated by a committee made up of foresters, wildlife specialists, industry representatives, among others. Martha's 162 hectares in West Loch Arbor have been in her family since the early 1940s and was passed over to her in the early 1980s. Over the years, Martha has produced a variety of products, including hardwood logs, balsam fir brush for wreaths, pulpwood, blueberries, and firewood. Mr. Speaker, I'm incredibly proud to have Martha Brown as one of my constituents. I truly believe she is a great example to her peers for best practices in sustainable land management, and I would like to offer my congratulations to her for receiving this well-deserved recognition. Thank you.
The honourable member for Pictou West.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to rise and recognize Mr. Kent Corbett. Kent has been a dedicated volunteer for the annual Pictou Lobster Carnival for 25 years. He has organized and assisted with almost every event that takes place during the carnival celebrations. Two of his personal favorites are the lobster boat races and trap hauling contest. In July, just prior to the 2015 Carnival weekend, the Lobster Carnival Committee presented Kent with a plaque honoring him for his long-time service and dedication. He was also named the Grand Marshal of the annual Saturday evening parade. Mr. Speaker, I am honored to recognize Kent for his volunteer work, for it is people like him that make Pictou West a great place to live. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Queens Shelburne.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, the term "to pay the piper" refers to one having to face the results of his or her action. Mr. Speaker, vendors across southwest Nova Scotia are still owed $200,000 for services provided to the Nova Star. The Minister of TIR was to oversee a financial report card of the Nova Star as a condition of the Nova Star's contract. However, Mr. Speaker, by my report card, the Minister is getting a failing grade in ensuring that Nova Scotians vendors get paid for their services. Mr. Speaker, it is time for the Minister of TIR to acknowledge and accept the unpleasant consequence of being the one holding a red pen. It was the Minister who oversaw the contract. Therefore, it is the Minister who should ensure that everybody pays the piper. Thank you.
The honourable member for Sydney River, Myra Lewisburg.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to congratulate the Riverview Reds on claiming the Nova Scotia School Athletic Federation Division I girls soccer title at the Cape Breton Health Recreation Complex last weekend. The Reds defeated the Halifax West Warriors 3-1 in the championship game. Head coach Maureen Ferguson said it was truly a team effort to claim this title. At this time, I would like to thank Maureen Ferguson and all the players on the Riverview Reds and congratulate everyone involved for all their time and dedication that goes into such a win. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Kings West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Wayne Fowler is to be congratulated on being awarded with the 6th annual Avesta Award. Wayne Fowler was the driving force behind the support gained for Kingston Arena's second-place finish in the 2014 Hockeyville competition. In his efforts to gain support throughout his community and Canada alike, he was able to gain over $100,000, which was used for the greatly needed repairs for the Kingston Arena. His dedication to help out his community's arena was paramount in gaining the support which Kingston needed to achieve their second-place position in the competition. I'm glad to have Mr. Wayne Fowler as a member of Kings West, someone who is proud of their community and takes the effort to better every aspect of the community, to repairing an arena, to bringing the citizens together and creating something of which everyone can be proud of. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Inverness.
Mr. Speaker, this summer Straths Bay Place hosted Bree, a concert series celebrating youth and Gaelic culture. It was an in-house production with 24 young performers between the ages of 6 and 17. Mr. Speaker, it was wonderful to see how hard everyone worked to put on an exceptional show. People who attended the night I was there were very impressed. It made me proud to see these young people speaking such good Gaelic, singing passionately, dancing and playing instruments. Our culture is in good hands. The cast is young, but they've been surrounded by the music and language since they were born, and some were surrounded before even that. So, Mr. Speaker, they included Stuart Cameron, Cullen McGuinness, Stephen McLennan, Maiden Ailey and Showanich Campbell, Amanda and Elizabeth McDonald, James Stephen, Niall and Cameron McIntyre, Jessie, Helen, Nora and Oriana, Katie, Agnes and Flora Gale McNeil, Maylie and Alistair Cameron, Grace McDonald, and Sarah Elizabeth, Annie, and Mary Catherine McGuinness. Let us acknowledge Tracy McNeil, Joyce McDowell, and everyone involved for making Bree a success. It is exactly the kind of production that justifies government investment in the performing arts venues in Nova Scotia.
The honourable member for Truro, Bible Hill, Millbrook, Salmon River.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the government will soon have to make a decision that will impact hundreds of families in Sydney, Cape Breton. According to a document tabled by the Minister of Education, also the chair of the Treasury Board, by November the 20th, she must announce what she will do with the lease of Sherwood Park Education Centre in Cape Breton. Whether the minister decides to spend millions of dollars to buy the school from the company that owns it, hundreds of millions to renew the lease, or opts to close the school altogether, none of these options are good ones. The NDP told the previous Liberal government that P3 schools were a mistake 20 years ago, Mr. Speaker, but they didn't listen. Now they're having to deal with the consequences of that short-sighted decision. Thank you.
The honourable member for Preston, Dartmouth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would like to recognize and congratulate Preston Simmons, a resident of East Preston, and his parents Edward and Rhonda Simmons on Preston's award-winning essay on how Black Canadians have helped define Canada's heritage. Preston submitted his essay, Piano Hands Melodies of Diversity, on the life of Oscar Peterson to the RBC Black History Month Student Essay Competition. Preston placed second in Canada and won $2,500 scholarship to put towards his studies. He did a special reading of his award-winning essay, the RBC branch at Porter's Lake. Preston attended Auburn High School and completed his grades 12. He is now enrolled in Bachelor of Neuroscience degree program in Carleton University in Ottawa, and he is planning to go to medical school. I applaud and commend Preston on his tremendous achievement and wish him every success in the future.
The honourable member for Kings North.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to highlight an outstanding event organized by the students of the Nova Scotia Community College King's Tech Tourism Management class, the Pumpkin Walk around Miners Marsh in Kentville. To enhance the eerie ambience during the walk, 300 creatively carved pumpkins adorned and lit the paths. Adding to the spirit, costume students Leah Price, Madison Forsyth, Savannah Sullivan, and Morgan Bond told tales of Kentville's spooky historical past. Since 2014, the walk has tripled in size, with 2,300 walkers participating in the 2-hour event this year. The students also collected and delivered 2 truckloads of donated foods from walkers for the local food bank. I am so proud and encouraged to congratulate the tourism students of this campus for organizing this successful event. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Dartmouth South.
Last week we heard unfortunate news from the Avalon Sexual Assault Centre. Their funding through the Canadian Women's Association had come to an end, and the centre would no longer be able to provide a legal advocate for survivors of assault while they go through the court process. This advocate provides support for survivors navigating the court system, which can be intimidating, confusing, and in some cases can take years. I urge the Minister of Justice to find solutions to bridge the gap left by the loss of Avalon's legal advocate to ensure that all survivors of sexual assault can feel empowered throughout their legal proceedings. Thank you.
The honourable member for Bedford on an introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to draw the members' attention to the East Gallery, where we are visited today by some student leaders. With us today are Nick Head-Peterson of Students Nova Scotia and Matthew Rios, who's here from CASA, and a number of our members met with them today, and I'd like to have them rise and ask my colleagues to give them the warm welcome of the House.
The honourable member for Bedford.
And on a completely unrelated note, Mr. Speaker, I would like to congratulate the Bedford Blues Minor Hockey Association on a series of provincial and league championships to finish last season. The Bedford Blues Pee Wee Blue team became provincial champions with 11-1 win at the Provincial Day of Champions. The Bedford Midget A Blue team won the Central Minor Hockey Federation Championships on the same day, defeating Halifax 3-2. To go along with these championships, the Bedford Oilers captured the Metro Minor Hockey Pee Wee League Championship with a 2-1 win, and the Adam Aces took home the win in the Metro Minor Hockey Adam B League Basin Division Championship. The Bedford Blues Minor Hockey Association is an important asset to the Bedford community, and I would like to commend all the Bedford minor hockey teams on their successes last season and wish them the best of luck this year. Thank you.
The honourable member for Chester St. Margaret's.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Recently, Mr. Speaker, Tourism Nova Scotia awarded its advertising business to an agency with offices in Vancouver, Edmonton, Toronto, and Montreal. To say I was surprised that this substantial contract wasn't awarded to a Nova Scotian company would be an understatement. The awarding of this contract means the bulk of the work will be done outside of Nova Scotia, and that's unacceptable. Our Nova Scotian advertising agencies are second to none, and they deserve our support. It's an industry that supports jobs for some of our most creative young people. And after more than a year of this government decimating our film industry, those are the last people we should be discouraging by shipping more work out of our province. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Pictou Centre.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to acknowledge a wonderful organization. Pictou County's United Way's mission is to inspire citizens to collaborate to produce positive social changes in our community. United Way has always been committed to meeting the needs of our county. United Way usually supports over 20 community programs and services. They are one of the largest non-government funder of social services in Pictou County. Pictou County residents continue to be generous with their financial support. A large thank you to Jessica Smith, Executive Director, Alan Fanning, Resource Development Coordinator, and the Board of Directors for their dedication and commitment to the residents of Pictou County. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Sackville-Cobequid.
On a point of order, Mr. Speaker. On a point of order. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to ask if you could review your former intervention on our members using the name of the Premier in the member statements. And I would like, if you could take the time to refer back to the second session of the 61st Assembly, when at the time Speaker Parker ruled in the same manner as you have just done in the last number of days, Mr. Speaker. But after reviewing Hansard and realizing that just by doing a review, there was well over 273 times that the Premier and the Premier's name was used, like in former Ham government, former McDonald government, and Dexter government. And Speaker Parker did overrule that and permitted the use of Dexter government in the last session of the House prior to the last election. So I would ask if you could look at that and please rule accordingly, and I'll provide that information.
I'll take that under advisement and bring it back to the House. The honourable member for Timberley Prospect.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to recognize Doug Branscombe, Area Coordinator, HRM Community Recreation Services, who will be retiring at the end of this calendar year after 40 years of providing recreational opportunities for countless thousands of people. Doug has helped countless community groups and local organizations to develop playgrounds and tots lots, build parks and trails. His expertise in creating partnerships and designing programming to meet community needs is second to none. In addition to Doug's career in recreation, he has a passion and dedication to Special Olympics, in particular with basketball. Doug is the assistant coach for the Halifax Warriors, and he leads the recreational and development areas of the Warrior program, which he founded in 2006. I would like the members of this Nova Scotia House of Assembly to join me in congratulating Doug on his retirement and wish him all the very best for the future. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Inverness on an introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to make an introduction. We have a former MLA with us today in the West Gallery. He was MLA for Inverness from 1988 to 1993. Please stand, Mr. Danny Graham, and perhaps the members could give him a round of applause.
The honourable member for Pictou East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Northumberland Nighthawks high school hockey team turned a lot of heads with their drive and determination when they played in the 25th annual Birthplace of Hockey high school tournament in Windsor recently. The Nighthawks, under head coach Harry Canuster, assistant coach Richie McDonald, and manager Jennifer Dykstra, went to the tournament semifinals Saturday evening, taking a 2-0 lead over Horton High, only to lose 3-2. The Nighthawks had advanced to the semifinals, blanking Central Kings 1-0. The play of Bryden Haas was recognized when he was chosen MVP for his team in all 3 Nighthawk round-robin games. Bryden is the team's leading scorer. The team will be hosting their own tournament in January, and we wish them much success and luck. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Sackville-Cobequid.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Often, as soon as someone has served our country, takes their uniform off, they lose recognition of their skills and the training they received while an active member. And that's just not right, Mr. Speaker. I'm calling on the Liberal government to join Manitoba, Ontario, Quebec in giving accreditation for the DND 404, the military driver's license, to allow veterans to obtain driver's permits for applicable Nova Scotia licenses and transition to a civilian career. 5,000 people in Canada, in the Canadian Forces, have the DND 404 license, which allows drivers to operate tractor-trailers, 5-ton trucks, and armored vehicles. This change would help retiring veterans quickly find jobs with trade unions who are looking for qualified drivers. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Dartmouth North.
We have just celebrated Small Business Week in Nova Scotia, and as the Premier so aptly noted, there's nothing small about small businesses in Nova Scotia. So I'm very pleased to announce that from our largest Atlantic Canadian neighbours, I wish a fond welcome to the Newfoundland Chocolate Company to Dartmouth North. What began as a home-based business in 2008, the Newfoundland Chocolate Company now boasts 4 locations, the newest being at Micmac Mall. Their opening was marked not by a ribbon-cutting ceremony, but a ribbon-biting ceremony, as the entire ribbon was made, of course, from chocolate. Founders Christina Dove and Brent Smith now employ dozens of people, and their stores offer Atlantic Canadian-themed chocolates, truffles, gelato, and my personal favorite, chocolate bars with Newfoundland sayings on them. I ask all of my colleagues in the House to join me in congratulating Christina and Dave on their newest store and encouraging everyone to visit the Newfoundland Chocolate Company at Micmac Mall. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Colchester, Musquodoboit Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the annual Kirk Logan Old Time Fiddling Contest just celebrated 20 years of fiddling at the Musquodoboit Valley Bicentennial Theatre on September the 26th. The contest was named for Kirk Logan, champion fiddler who represented the Musquodoboit Valley at old-time fiddling contests throughout Eastern Canada for over 50 years. This 20th anniversary edition of the contest had competitors ranging from ages 5 to 93 in 4 different categories. Lifelong fiddler, 93-year-old Mel McPhee was recognized for his contribution to the Down East Coast fiddle experience with a Certificate of Appreciation. This year, Kirk Logan's children Clarence, Deanna, and Brittany presented the awards. I'd like to thank the organizers of this event for their efforts in keeping the tradition of fiddling alive and congratulate them on achieving a 20-year milestone. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Cape Breton Centre.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to recognize the late Frankie Bursey for his time and commitment to the Waterford sports community. Mr. Bursey was an influential part in the development and athletes, sports teams and programs in Waterford. In his youth, Frankie played minor baseball and was a member of the BEC High School soccer team, which took home the provincial championship in 1975, but his true passion was coaching and growing in the athletic teams in his hometown. Frankie coached a variety minors baseball teams over the last 15 years, during which time his teams took home 5 provincial titles at the Mosquito and Pee Wee level. But his love for baseball was not only as a coach, he also served in the Waterford Minor Baseball Board of Directors for over 15 years and was provincial coordinator for the Slow Pitch National Program for 10 years. He was truly an inspiration and many athletes, and his legacy will live on in his kids he coached. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Argyle-Barrington.
Mr. Speaker, on May 14th, Nikhil Home for Special Care in Argyle held its official grand reopening. Residents and their families, employees, friends, and invited dignitaries all celebrated together. Nikhil Home for Special Care has been in operation since 1989 and has always been at full capacity. Nikhil Home for Special Care now has 48 beds and employs 80 full and part-time employees. The celebration also presented an opportunity to mark the important occasion of their 25th anniversary of the facility. Please join me in congratulating the administration, the staff, and residents of Nikhil Home for Special Care.
The honourable member for Hants East.
It's interesting to note how businesses can evolve, that one can lead to another. Nancy and Greg McTiernan bought Hardwick's greenhouses in 1997 from her parents and opened a store in Elmsdale. The business needed to increase revenue, so in the evenings, Nancy industriously made fudge. It was a great hit, selling very quickly. The McTiernans decided to purchase a machine to increase their fudge production, and Nancy and Greg went to school to learn further the art of candy making. 2 years later, they expanded, closed the greenhouses, and changed their names to the Sweet Spot Chocolate Shop and moved to a larger location. Recently, the shop has started an online catalog offering a select amount of their items online. The Sweet Spot Chocolate Shop is thriving, and Nancy and Greg believe that their success comes from the small businesses' hands-on mentality that the shop embodies. The chocolates are made in small batches, which ensures maximum freshness. Mr. Speaker, if you have not already had the pleasure of trying these delectable chocolates, you should really treat yourself to their awesomeness. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Northside Westmount.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to salute Angela Hull and Sandy Cantwell-Kerr of the Northside Soccer Association. These two women entered the National Craft Project Play contest that had a $250,000 grand prize to upgrade a community sports facility. After making it to one of the 4 semi-finalists, voting began and capers stepped up from around the world and Monroe Park Soccer Field won. It's a true pleasure to have this opportunity to congratulate Angela and Sandy and their army of volunteers for harnessing the Northside's greatest community spirit for this great cause. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Lunenburg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Spirits were flying high recently in the town of Lunenburg. Earlier this fall, distillers from across the province gathered in Lunenburg to enjoy Spirited Away, Nova Scotia's first ever craft distillery festival. The event brought people from all over the province to experience the growing industry. There are now 9 small distilleries in the province, including Lunenburg's own award-winning Ironworks Distillery. It was by all accounts a successful event and will hopefully become an annual one that grows, as does the industry. Mr. Speaker, I wish to take time today to congratulate the organizers of Spirited Away and wish all those involved a prosperous future. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Pictou West.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to rise today to recognize Stevie Jarawa and Josiah McDonald, who were co-organizers of the Pride Week celebrations that took place June 22nd to the 28th in Pictou County. Much planning and preparation went into the week, and Stevie and Josiah made every effort to make the events both educational and fun. Panel discussions, concerts, and a family fun day were all part of the celebrations. The pair feel the Pride Week celebrations are important in making people feel comfortable in the community they live, contributes to a positive change in attitudes, and keeps an open dialogue about the issues facing the LGBTQ community. Support for the 2015 celebrations was higher than ever, ensuring the celebrations would continue in years to come. Congratulations, Stevie and Josiah. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Victoria the Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to bring attention to the dangers of texting while driving. Throughout the month of October, RCMP traffic service units across the province continued conducting enforcement and educational initiatives on the dangers of distracted driving. Distracted driving remains one of the leading causes of serious and fatal injury on Nova Scotia's roadways, and we must all remember it only takes a few seconds of distraction to result in a tragedy. Motorists are encouraged to place handheld devices out of reach, such as in glove boxes or in the back seat, so they are not tempted to use them while driving. Mr. Speaker, I urge all members to visit leavethePhoneAlone.ca and take the pledge to leave the phone alone while driving. Leaving the phone alone makes all roads safer for all Nova Scotians. Thank you.
The honourable member for Sydney River Myra Lewisburg.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to congratulate Wayne Weatherby and Sydney Memorial Chapel on celebrating their 40 years in business. Wayne Weatherby is not only a strong businessman in Sydney and surrounding areas, but also a strong advocate for many charitable activities. He is well known for his generosity for people in need. I would like to thank and congratulate Wayne Weatherby and Sydney Memorial Chapel for serving Sydney and all surrounding areas for the past 40 years, and hopefully they will be continuing their work for many years to come. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Cole Harbour, Portland Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it is my pleasure to rise today to speak about Portland Estates and Portland Hills Residents Association. For 20 years, the Residents Association has tirelessly worked on improving the ever-growing neighborhoods of Portland Estates and Portland Hills, whether through community events or launching initiatives like their annual spring cleanup. I was glad to assist in the most recent spring cleanup of litter and debris throughout the walking paths and parks within the neighborhood. It was a pleasure seeing all those that came out to help. The many folks of all ages, young people and so on. The association also takes the lead in bringing to light environmental
please.
issues.
Time allotted for member statements has expired. We'll now move on to oral questions put by members to ministers. The Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Premier. Yesterday, in media reports, the Premier's Chief of Staff repeatedly and publicly disclosed sensitive, personal, private medical information about a member of this House. Mr. Speaker, on whose authority did the Premier's Chief of Staff tell all about a member's private, personal medical history?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition would know that the member for Dartmouth East has filed a complaint in relation to the issue that he refers to. As a result of the fact that there is a complaint filed, we will certainly respect that process and not make further comments on it.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Well, Mr. Speaker, that is not acceptable. Whether what happened yesterday was illegal or not, that will be decided in the courts. But whether such a despicable act, whether such an immoral act is given the stamp of approval by this government or not, that is the question. They have every right and ability and responsibility to be clear as a government about whether they agree with giving out private medical information of an employee when it's someone they don't agree with. But, Mr. Speaker, I'll ask the Premier a very simple question. Does he truly believe it's okay to give out private medical information on an employee of the government or a member of this House just to save someone's job?
I remind the Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition that the term immoral is unparliamentary. The Honourable and despicable. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, again, as has been pointed out, the fact is that there has been a complaint made in relation to this matter. We will certainly respect the complaint process, ensure that it is dealt with, and it would be inappropriate to make further comments until such time as that complaint has been addressed.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the government comes here to this House in question period to answer for its own responsibility in these matters, and it cannot hide behind the courts. I'm not asking the government or the Premier to give a legal opinion. I'm asking them to express whether they agree with what was said publicly yesterday in the release of private medical information or not. The fact of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, that there is a Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act in this province, and in Section 20 it says, and I quote, the personal information relates it says, and I quote, personal information is an unreasonable invasion of privacy if the personal information relates to a medical, dental, psychological, or other health care history. That's exactly what happened yesterday, Mr. Speaker. Why did the government ignore this important piece of legislation when they went into damage control mode yesterday?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, as I indicated previously, there's been a complaint that has been filed in relation to this matter. As a result of that, we will certainly respect that complaint process, and it would be inappropriate to comment any further on the matter.
The Honourable Acting Leader of the New Democratic Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question through you is to the Minister of Health. Mr. Speaker, under Nova Scotia's Personal Health Information Act, passed in 2010, health care providers are explicitly prohibited from releasing an individual's personal health information without their consent. And there are severe penalties for breaching this act, Mr. Speaker. So my question to the Minister of Health is this. Would the Minister of Health please explain why it's important to not release personal health information without a patient's consent?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, as indicated earlier, there has been a complaint that has been filed in relation to this matter. It would be inappropriate to comment further until such time as the complaint has been dealt with. We will certainly respect the processes that we have in place in this province in order to ensure that this complaint is dealt with appropriately.
The Honourable Acting Leader of the New Democratic Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Apparently, the Minister of Health isn't allowed to talk about policy in his department, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Perhaps he's no longer going to be the Minister of Health, but nevertheless, this question will go again to the Minister of Health. Mr. Speaker, the Premier's Chief of Staff yesterday, unprompted, released personal health information of a member of the Legislature without this individual's consent. So my question to the Minister of Health is this: would he please explain whether or not he agrees with the release of personal health information without consent by the Premier's Chief of Staff?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, as previously indicated, there has been a complaint that has been filed in relation to this matter. I believe that the acting leader of the NDP knows full well, having been in this House for as long as she has, that it would be absolutely inappropriate to make comments in relation to the fact once a complaint has been filed. As a result of that, Mr. Speaker, we will continue to respect the process until it is finalized.
The Honourable Acting Leader of the New Democratic Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I have a final question that's not about the complaint that's been filed. I see the member from the Amherst area is very happy that there's a question that's not about complaints. There are so many complaints about members of that government and the Premier's staff, it's hard to keep them straight, Mr. Speaker. So I can see why he'd be excited. But, Mr. Speaker, my question for the Minister of Health is this: why should there be a double standard where health care providers who disclose a person's personal health information are punished, but the Premier's Chief of Staff apparently can do no wrong?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I would point out to the Honourable Acting Leader of the NDP a Saturday, May 22nd article of 2010, which says Dexter's Chief of Staff, anonymous story critic. And the headline goes on: O'Connor denies, then admits to sending comments to Chronicle Herald website, panning article about cost of energy strategy rollout. Mr. Speaker, if I'm not mistaken, following this story...
Order, please. Order, please. The Honourable Government House Leader has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, if I'm not mistaken, the Premier of the day maintained confidence in his Chief of Staff for a further 3 years.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, you know, there's precedent here. In 1990, a Minister of Health in this House released private personal medical information about a deputy minister, an employee of the government, Mr. Speaker. That case ended up in court, and that minister lost his job. Mr. Speaker, disclosing a person's personal private medical history because you don't agree with what they've done is just wrong, Mr. Speaker. So does the Premier today agree that that same consequence should happen when an employee of his government goes ahead and releases private medical information, just like happened back with that minister in 1990?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, a complaint has been filed in this matter. I believe it's the House's duty to respect the process, to see to it that this complaint is dealt with under the structures that we have here in this province. I believe the Leader of the Official Opposition knows it would be completely inappropriate to be discussing matters of this specific nature. In light of the fact that a complaint has been filed, we'll continue to respect that process.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, what we know is that a government that campaigned to be open and transparent and accountable, daring to call themselves the most open in Canada, won't answer simple questions about what the Chief of Staff to the Premier did and whose approval he had to do it. Mr. Speaker, perfectly open and legitimate questions in this House. And that minister that's answering today, he is a former Minister of Justice, and he knows that employers have an obligation to keep private medical information from their employees. And yet the government flagrantly violated that principle yesterday, ignoring their obligation to their own people, Mr. Speaker. This is just the latest in this long-running drama. So I'll ask the minister directly, in light of this most recent revelation, why does Kirby McVicker still have his job?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I know that I've had the privilege to hold a number of portfolios during my career, and even at times I may get confused as to those portfolios, but I have never served as Minister of Justice or Attorney General. As pointed out by the Leader of the Official Opposition, at least up till now, I'm sure he would not want to be accused of misleading the House by making such allegations. Mr. Speaker, the fact is that a complaint has been launched in regards to this matter, and as a result of that, Mr. Speaker, we are going to respect that process and see it dealt with appropriately.
The Honourable Acting Leader of the New Democratic Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Health. Mr. Speaker, mental illness among Canadians is quite common. Mr. Speaker, statistics show that 1 in 5 Canadians experience mental illness at some point in their lives. And it's long been known that the stigma associated with mental illness is one of the biggest reasons people fail to seek treatment. Mr. Speaker, I wonder if the Minister of Health could explain what steps he has taken to ensure that the stigma associated with mental illness is reduced or eliminated.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I'm pleased to say that as recently as last week, when Michael Wilson was attending the luncheon for the Mental Health Foundation of Nova Scotia, he pointed out how strongly the work is going on in our province in terms of dealing with the stigma around mental health. And in particular, the program Working Minds, that now over 2,000 government employees have engaged in, and that it's already seen its value in the workplace. Over 200 instructors at the Nova Scotia Community College have also taken part in this program, and there are others that the Mental Health the Mental Health Advisory Council of Canada see as being very strong and active in our province.
The Honourable Acting Leader of the New Democratic Party.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, Mr. Speaker, the Premier's Chief of Staff disclosed without permission a mental health diagnosis in an attempt to embarrass a person who is in a very public fight with the Premier and his government, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to ask the Minister of Health, what justification is there for stigmatizing a person with a diagnosis for which we want people to seek treatment?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, the acting leader of the NDP knows very well that a complaint has been filed in regards to this matter. It would be inappropriate to be having these types of discussions on the floor of the House or even outside the House when such a complaint is yet to have been properly dealt with. Mr. Speaker, we will respect the process we have in place in our province and allow the complaint to go through its normal courses.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, in 2006, the press secretary to the Premier of New Brunswick released a letter containing personal information about a constituent. That press secretary lost his job. He resigned. He admitted that he'd made a mistake, and his own Premier gave him credit for owning up to his mistake, but he accepted his resignation. Mr. Speaker, my question to the Premier today is, who should hold Mr. McVicker responsible for doing the exact same thing here in Nova Scotia?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I believe the Leader of the Official Opposition is aware that a complaint was filed this morning. As a result of that, Mr. Speaker, it would be inappropriate to be discussing the specific matters of this case. We will respect the process and allow the complaint to be dealt with.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, there is no reason in law or otherwise why the government can't answer very direct and simple questions about who holds the Chief of Staff responsible for his actions, what the role of the Premier is in taking responsibility for this whole sorry mess, and who gave the authority to do such a horrible thing as to give out someone's private medical history in an attempt to embarrass that person and save the Chief of Staff's job. Mr. Speaker, that is just wrong, and there is nothing that holds the government back from saying so. Mr. Speaker, here we are. We have a Chief of Staff who, under someone's direction, took direct action to try and embarrass a member of the House that doesn't agree with the government on a pretty big issue. So I'd like to ask the Minister if he agrees with the Premier's action today to basically do nothing and thereby condone this whole sorry episode.
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Leader of the Official Opposition will forgive me if I don't accept his legal advice that he wishes to offer to this House. Mr. Speaker, instead, I would say that we have a complaint which has been filed. As a result of that, it would be inappropriate to be discussing this matter either on the floor of this House or outside. We will respect the process and allow the complaint to be heard and dealt with.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, let's be clear. There is no legal advice that the Minister has that says he can't talk about it. He may have political advice or damage control advice, but he does not have legal advice, because if he did, he'd know he could be answering these questions today. Mr. Speaker, on November 19th, just a few short days ago, in a media interview, the Minister of Energy was asked, does Kirby McVicker still have a job? And his answer was absolutely. And then he was asked, does he still have the confidence of the Premier? And the Minister then said, absolutely. And he has the confidence of the Cabinet and our entire government. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, is that statement of November 19th, stating that the Chief of Staff has the confidence of the Cabinet, still true today?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Speaker, as the Leader of the Official Opposition is aware, a complaint was filed this morning regarding to this matter. It would be inappropriate, Mr. Speaker, to be debating this issue on the floor of this House or even outside of this House. We will respect the complaint that has been filed and allow it to work through its normal course.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, we'll take that as a no, and no wonder, because today, November 24th, that same minister was asked, do you still have full confidence in the Chief of Staff? And his answer changed from what it was just 5 days ago, Mr. Speaker. His answer was, the relationship between the Chief of Staff is with the Premier. Therefore, I'm not in a position to comment. Well, he was in full position to comment 5 days ago that the Chief of Staff had the confidence of the Cabinet, of which he is a member. But conveniently, he dropped that part of the confidence in his answer to the same question today. Mr. Speaker, will the Minister get up and just state the obvious, that what the Chief of Staff did yesterday was wrong and he should lose his job because of it?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, as the Leader of the Official Opposition is aware, a complaint was filed this morning regarding this matter. He knows full well it's completely inappropriate to discuss this matter on the floor of this House or even outside of this House. We'll respect the complaint process that has been initiated, and we will await to see the results of that process.
The Honourable Acting Leader of the New Democratic Party.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question for you is to the Deputy Premier. Mr. Speaker, the Premier's Chief of Staff has told several media outlets yesterday, including the Chronicle Herald, that his conversation in February with the member for Dartmouth East was a, quote, unofficial conversation, Mr. Speaker. Now, I can't help but wonder how Nova Scotians can tell the difference between an official and an unofficial conversation with the Premier's Chief of Staff. So my question to the Deputy Premier is this. Could she please clarify for us what the difference is between an official and an unofficial conversation?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Speaker, as the Acting Leader of the NDP is well aware, a complaint was filed this morning in relation to this matter. I believe she's been in this House as long as I have, which, for those who are counting, it's 17 years. During that time, she has been a minister of different portfolios, and she's well aware of the processes we have in place in our province. And when she would have been a minister, she would have taken the same approach as indicating how inappropriate it would be to be debating this type of a complaint on the floor of the House before the complaint had been dealt with. Nothing has changed from when she was a minister to when we are ministers in respecting the processes that are in place.
The Honourable Acting Leader of the New Democratic Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I've been here long enough to know the difference between a Premier and a Deputy Premier and a House Leader. and it's concerning that the Deputy Premier isn't being allowed to ask questions, answer questions as well, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Deputy Premier. Mr. Speaker, the Premier has told us repeatedly that his staff, in particular his Chief of Staff, speak for him, and that's a direct quote. Yet he also maintains he was unaware of countless conversations, disclosures, and job offers made by his Chief of Staff over the last 12 months. So my question to the Deputy Premier, Mr. Speaker, is how can the Premier's Chief of Staff speak for him if he never speaks to him?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, it was interesting in a scrum last week when the acting leader of the NDP was being asked questions relating to this matter. And at one point, the press challenged her and said, "Isn't this just you playing politics?" And her response was, "That's what we do." Enough said.
The Honourable Member for Hants West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question this afternoon through you is to the Minister of Transportation. He knew it. Mr. Speaker, in a recent article published by the Chronicle Herald, regarding new toll highways throughout Nova Scotia, or at least the assessment, there was a question asked through a number of my constituents, and I'll ask it on their behalf today, regarding this opinion piece, the idea of a high-speed rail network throughout some of these same areas in Nova Scotia. And I would like to ask the Minister, is such a thing being considered during the study or the assessment of toll highways across the province?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for the question. The quick answer to that, Mr. Speaker, is no. With respect to the capital costs associated with our rail beds, we're having a tough time keeping those we have in place on the ground now, and as the member knows, there's a number of processes for that in place. But with respect to any commuter travel or passenger travel, Mr. Speaker, my personal opinion is that we just don't have the critical numbers. I haven't received any of those suggestions or any ideas that there is outside of downtown here in Metro. I don't know if there's a commuter model that would be viable. So I haven't certainly heard that. Like anything else, we're open to information, but Mr. Speaker, from our perspective, from a capital side and from a marketing side, I just don't know if those numbers would add up. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Hants West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I guess I'll just follow up. He spoke about the rail beds, the condition they're in. I think everyone knows that. We also, the article goes on to mention the actual cost, and the Minister would know the cost well of the twinning of highways, the very expensive amount of money, and so very interesting, the comparison. It almost sounds like there's been some comparison done, maybe in what high-speed rail would cost, if I heard that correctly. But to follow up, will the rail bids be kept in the status they're in by way of ownership as it stands today?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for that question. It is an important one. I think that when you look at the different rail beds we have across the province, there are different ownership groups, obviously different business models associated with those. So really, it's a case by case. Again, when you look at what CN has here in the operation downtown Metro, there is viability in alternative services, I think, and HRM, some of the MPs, and of course at the provincial level, there's been some measure of discussion. But with respect to the rail, again, the capital cost is very significant, probably comparable with some of that major highway development. But then you're into that viability of the market and what the passenger count looks like. You take Via Rail, for example, they subsidize a number of runs for this exact reason. So when you look at populations, it's hard to justify that critical mass that's required to pay the bills. Thanks a lot.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. My question is for the Robo-Minister over there today. Mr. Speaker, a formal...
Order, please. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A formal complaint about the disclosure of personal information by the Premier's Chief of Staff was lodged today. The Minister has been repeatedly referring to that. Mr. Speaker, it alleges a pretty serious breach of the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act. So I'd like to ask the Minister, so we can get on with some answers here, will he direct the FOIPOP officer to deal with the complaint right away so we can get on with answering questions that Nova Scotians deserve an answer to here in this House.
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, the province of Nova Scotia has established standards when it comes to dealing with complaints. Leader of the official opposition is aware of that. That process is what will be used now that a complaint has been launched on this. He knows very well that it would be inappropriate to be discussing any matters relating to this now that a complaint has been filed. We've indicated that we will respect the complaint process and we will await the results of that before commenting further.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the province of Nova Scotia has established standards about not disclosing personal information, but that got flagrantly violated. The province of Nova Scotia has established standards about not offering a job to the wife of a member of the House, Mr. Speaker, but that's been violated. Suddenly, the government wants to enforce a standard about the Freedom of Information officer when all we're asking is that that person deal with the complaint right away so we can get on with the answers that Nova Scotians deserve to know. I'll ask the minister. There is no standard that says the rulings of the Freedom of Information officer can't be made public. Will he commit today, on behalf of the government, that the findings on this complaint will be made public at the earliest possible opportunity?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, the complaint was made this morning, mere hours ago. That complaint will be dealt with throughout our existing systems that we have here in the province of Nova Scotia and will be dealt with as all other complaints are. Any Nova Scotian who feels they wish to issue a complaint, I believe everyone should be treated fairly when it comes to that. That's how the system is set up to deal with those types of complaints. We will respect the process and we will await to see the results of that complaint.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, disclosing private personal medical information was not the only interesting thing that the Chief of Staff had to say yesterday. It turns out that when he offered the wife of the member for Dartmouth East a job, he said that he would talk to the Deputy Minister about it. However, yesterday he said he was considering a job in the Liberal caucus office. Well, Mr. Speaker, we all know Deputy Ministers do not hire people for political party caucus offices, Mr. Speaker. They are making up their defence as they go along. Well, ask the Minister directly, why would the Chief of Staff need to talk to a Deputy Minister if the job was merely one in the Liberal caucus office?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I believe that it has been indicated by the Chief of Staff that the recording is not reflective of the entire conversation. What we have and what you have ruled today is that you've accepted that the member for Dartmouth East statement that he provided what he recorded. It has been stated that there was a further conversation that did take place that we do not have the recordings. Therefore, only 2 individuals were parties to that specific discussion. Mr. Speaker, one of those has launched a complaint this morning. As I've indicated, we have a process in place to deal with such complaints. It would be inappropriate to be discussing this matter further until that complaint is dealt with, a process for which we will fully respect.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the government wasn't satisfied when we had a snippet of this conversation. Then they weren't satisfied when we had 2 snippets of this conversation. Now they have 12 whole minutes where the Chief of Staff lays out his plan to make sure that the member for Dartmouth East's wife has a personal services contract, Mr. Speaker. They can say it's under investigation. We have an RCMP investigation now. We have a complaint to the FOIPOP officer now, Mr. Speaker. How many investigations have to be launched before someone is held accountable over there for the actions of this Premier's office?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I would remind the Leader of the Official Opposition that his entire caucus voted in favour of the motion from this House to obtain the full recording. The opposition party with the NDP voted in full support. It was a unanimous motion of this House asking for that full recording. You have made a ruling today accepting that what was recorded was actually disclosed. It has been indicated that there was a further conversation that took place that is not recorded. Again, since a complaint has been filed this morning, it would be inappropriate to discuss this matter further until such time as the complaint process has been concluded.
The Honourable Acting Leader of the New Democratic Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question through you is to the Minister of Internal Services, who oversees much of the processes with respect to enforcing privacy and confidentiality of personal information. Mr. Speaker, I have a very simple question for the Minister of Internal Services, and that is, what policy exists, what is the policy around releasing the health information without permission of a patient for his office?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, the acting leader of the NDP is aware that a complaint was filed this morning in relation to the matter for which she raises a question. Mr. Speaker, as I mentioned last week in a scrum, when challenged by the press on this very issue, the acting leader of the NDP was asked, "Are you not just playing politics?" And her response was, "That's what we do." Mr. Speaker, what we do in the government is focus on the issues that face Nova Scotia families, and we're making sure that Nova Scotians get the good government that they deserve. That is what we will remain focused on.
The Honourable Acting Leader of the New Democratic Party.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I don't need to be mansplained to in this legislature about what the role of the opposition is with respect to asking tough questions. But, Mr. Speaker, that member should be reminded of what his duty is in terms of answering tough questions and being accountable to the people of Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I have an additional question for the Minister of Internal Services, and that is simply this. What penalty is there for anyone who improperly releases personal health information without permission from a patient?
There you go. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, the acting leader of the NDP, again, as I pointed out last week, made it very clear what her intent was on this issue, and it was to play politics. Mr. Speaker, we're seeing it on display again here today when the opposition has an opportunity to raise questions on behalf of Nova Scotians on so many issues. Mr. Speaker, I will again reiterate, our government remains focused on providing good government to the people of this province. Nova Scotians are seeing some of the strategic investments that we are making. They're seeing the results of new programs and results of new initiatives. Mr. Speaker, we will remain focused on providing that good government.
The Honourable Member for Pictou East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Procurement, Internal Services and Procurement. There was a high-profile contract in tourism recently awarded to a company from outside Nova Scotia, and many Nova Scotians scratched their heads wondering how such an important contract could be awarded to a company from Ontario. And this was especially a slap in the face to the many local companies that spent many hours and thousands of dollars preparing their bid. Mr. Speaker, people are wondering, how often does this happen? So my question for the Minister today is the Minister aware of how many contracts were awarded to companies based outside of Nova Scotia so far this year?
The Honourable Minister of Internal Services.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to congratulate Trampoline, who was the co-winner of that contract. Mr. Speaker, Trampoline is located just right here on Barrington Street. I would also like to add, in that contract, it's $6 million a year, $5 million of which is media buying, and DDB is the largest media buyer in Canada. They do this exact same work for the Government of Canada. I would also like to add that we put a goal in front for this RFP, which stated we want to double tourism in Nova Scotia, which is an Ivany goal, which the opposition seems to be in favour of. And, Mr. Speaker, ironically enough, every single Nova Scotia company partnered up with a larger firm so they could get that buying power and deliver it to Nova Scotians, doubling tourism. So I'm not sure where this complaint is coming from, but it's not coming from the bidders because they all had partners that were non-Nova Scotia companies.
The Honourable Member for Pictou East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And clearly the minister is unsure of something. It was a simple question: how many contracts are awarded to companies outside of Nova Scotia? He doesn't know the answer. I think Nova Scotians will be really disappointed that the minister doesn't care about Nova Scotia companies, doesn't care about jobs here. So I'm going to ask it I'll try another way. Mr. Speaker.
Order, please. The honourable member for Pictou East has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thought if we got another minister on his feet, we might get an answer, but sadly, Mr. Speaker, not today. So many people are asking, what sort of metric must the government be looking at when they award these things out? When I'm talking to Nova Scotians who lost their job, they often ask me, does the government think they're saving money? So my question for the minister today is quite simply, from their voices, does the government think they're saving money by sending business out of the province?
The Honourable Minister of Internal Services.
Mr. Speaker, quick geography lesson. Barrington Street's a block behind us, and the co-winner of that contract is a Nova Scotia company. Mr. Speaker, procurement in the province of Nova Scotia, 81% of all procurement goes to Nova Scotia companies. We are leaders in Canada. Mr. Speaker, we balance finding the best company to deliver services for Nova Scotia and supporting Nova Scotia companies, and Nova Scotia is a leader in it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Kings North.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Agriculture. Mr. Speaker, workers at Hilton Foods were dealt some devastating news recently when they were told that by Oxford Frozen Foods, the carrot plant was closing and 98 seasonal jobs were being lost. The municipality of Kings County Council has stepped forward and offered their support in treating wastewater. Mr. Speaker, my question for the minister is this. Knowing this, will the Minister of Agriculture today inform this House and residents of the Annapolis Valley what his department did or what support they offered to prevent the closure of Hilton Foods?
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Thank you very much for that question. Unfortunately, that's a decision by a private company. I'm very excited to see that the municipalities work with the company, and we look forward to them to keeping the facility open under a different mandate.
The honourable member for Kings North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the minister for that answer. I'm not sure what it was that he said that they actually did. Mr. Speaker, in the Premier's constituency of Annapolis, King's Produce Processing, situated in the town of Milton, gave workers 2 days' notice earlier this month on the closure of this business. 40 to 50 full-time jobs are vital in such a small town as Milton. Many farmers are concerned about the loss of agricultural processing capacity in Nova Scotia. My question, Mr. Speaker, for the minister is this. What is the Minister of Agriculture doing to ensure agricultural food processing is going to continue in Nova Scotia?
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
We're very dedicated to ensure that processing continues in the province. It's added value to the province. Unfortunately, when private companies make decisions, we're no longer going to run in with government money and try to bail them out because it doesn't work. It's official opposition did it in the past, and the last government did it as well. It doesn't work. We have to go to a free market situation, and that's what happened in this case.
The honourable member for Truro, Bible Hill, Millbrook, Salmon River.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Education Action Plan, released earlier this year by the Department of Education and Early Childhood Development, is an ambitious response to address concerns raised in the Freeman Report. It's clear that teachers will need to play a significant role on the front lines implementing change. And in response to the plan, the NSTU President, Shelley Morse, said, and I quote, "We want to work with the department to ensure that the voice of active teachers is included in the changes coming forward that impact current practice and policy in public education." And I'll table that, Mr. Speaker. But therefore, my question for the minister is this. Beyond the feedback encompassed in the Freeman Report, how have teachers actually been consulted and engaged in the creation and implementation of the Education Action Plan?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you for the question. I'm very pleased to remind the member that teachers have been engaged from the get-go with the action plan. in fact, Mr. Speaker, over 5,000 teachers responded and gave us their opinions about what we needed to do within the action plan to make sure that public education continued to grow in this province and that the learning and teaching environment in the classroom was improved for both teachers and students. They gave us their feedback, and, Mr. Speaker, they have been involved in every step of the way in coming into our department. We are seeking their opinion. We value their opinion because, Mr. Speaker, they are the people that drive education in this province.
The honourable member for Truro, Bible Hill, Millbrook, Salmon River.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm glad to hear the minister say that she feels teachers are the driving force, because actually what I'm hearing from teachers is they're very upset that they were not consulted properly, and in fact they say that writing in and sending in their ideas on an online process is not called consultation. So, Mr. Speaker, over the last decade, there's been an increasing number of students placed on individual programs, plans, or IPPs. While the root causes of this result can be debated, it's clear that it is teachers who will have to address ongoing changes related to classroom curriculum. Therefore, my question for the minister is this: what kind of support is provided to teachers who are responsible for the delivery of IPPs?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And to respond to part of the question, or an allegation, I guess, that was there, I think it's important, and teachers know this, I'll share with every member in the House this, that it was the teachers who came in, and it was the teachers who determined how we would streamline the curriculum, and it was the teachers who are committed to reducing the outcomes for kids.
The honourable member for Hants West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question through you will be to the Minister of Department of Community Services. We all know the importance of what her department does and the people that she serves, Mr. Speaker, in this province, and I wonder if the Minister could give us an update on the benefit reform currently happening within her department.
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you for the question. One of the highest priorities of the department is making sure that the income assistance portion of the Department of Community Services is both effective and sustainable. So about 18 months ago, just after we were elected, we started a long-term process to really do comprehensive change and transformation within a system which, quite frankly, has not been working to meet the needs of people for a couple of decades now. So I'm very pleased to say that we've moved along a major restructuring within the upper echelons of administration, and the RFPs for trying to bring together the expertise in the community, also working with the people within the department who are the subject matter experts, hit the streets about 30 days ago, and we're moving along at the pace that we had determined.
The honourable member for Hants West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister for that answer. Moving along, I wonder if she could be a little more clear on time frame, perhaps, on such a reform.
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Absolutely. We had said from the onset that this was going to be a three-phased approach, and we've just finished phase one, which took about 18 months. We're now beginning phase two, which we consider will take another year, a little more than a year. We're looking for complete, comprehensive overall of a system that hasn't been meeting the needs of people for many, many years, and we're looking at an end date for that to be 2018.
The honourable member for Pictou East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question for the Minister of Finance. Many provinces have made the decision to become part of the national securities regulatory system. Having our own system simply duplicates what the national system could do, and it's redundant and creates red tape for business, Mr. Speaker. The previous Minister of Finance was quick to point out that having our own securities commission generated $15 million in revenue for the province. So my question today is, will the minister admit that revenue is the only reason for refusing to join the national securities regulator?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member opposite for the question. With respect to the national securities regulator, since I've started in my position as Minister of Finance, Mr. Speaker. I've been on the public record that we are considering and haven't closed the door on that option. But, Mr. Speaker, for the vast majority of time that I've been in this position, the federal government has been or was busy with the federal election campaign, which kind of put any discussions on hold. Thank you.
The honourable member for Pictou East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And it's interesting to hear that there's investigation and research going on. It was 406 days ago that I stood in this House and asked the then Minister of Finance about it, and I heard at that time that there was a lot of time being investigated looking at this particular issue. So here we are, 406 days later. We have more collaboration between the Prime Minister and the provinces with each other. And on this issue, Nova Scotia is standing on the outside looking in. And I'm wondering why. So if the Minister hasn't and the Department haven't had enough time to determine whether the advantages are worth it, I would ask the Minister today, can the Minister tell us what disadvantages of joining the national system they've come across?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, what I'd like to advise the member opposite of actually, I believe on the order paper for today, we'll be talking a little bit more about what we do in the province of Nova Scotia to work on a national scale to harmonize our securities regulations. A lot of work that exists in reducing the red tape and the regulatory burden in the securities area, Mr. Speaker, and we're continuing to proceed in that vein. With respect to joining the national securities regulator, Mr. Speaker, what we've committed to, what my predecessor committed to, Mr. Speaker, was ensuring that if we enter into such an agreement, we'd make sure it's in the best interest of all Nova Scotians. Thank you.
The honourable member for Dartmouth South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's been 26 years since the House of Commons vowed to end child poverty. Today, a report called End It Now by Leslie Frank, professor at Acadia University, provided a report card on child and family poverty in Nova Scotia. In Nova Scotia, child poverty rates are alarmingly high. Nova Scotia is home to the third highest child poverty rate in all of Canada, with 1 in 5 children living in poverty. These numbers increase when you look at Cape Breton, where 1 in 3 children live in poverty. Shocking young children under the age of 6 in the Cape Breton census area have a poverty rate of 42.7%.
Does the member have a question?
Mr. Speaker, can the Minister explain how Nova Scotia has one of the highest rates of child poverty in Canada?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you for the question. Child poverty is something that as a government, that as a province, we all have a responsibility in. I am so encouraged by the recent announcements coming from the federal government that looks at raising, to stop sending, checks to millionaires, unlike the two parties across the way from me that they wanted to do and had continued to do federally, but will actually focus child tax credits on the families that need them, lifting hundreds of thousands of children out of poverty. And I'm looking forward to working with my counterpart federally on that initiative, specifically as it pertains to the children of Nova Scotia.
The honourable member for Dartmouth South.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, over the past 2 years, however, child and family poverty is on the rise. And last year, Leslie Frank, the same author who published this year's report, released a similar report on child and family poverty, and I will table that. The numbers haven't changed. In fact, the number of children using food banks has risen by 2%. In addition, 51% of food bank users are women, up 5%. Mr. Speaker, can the Minister outline what specific steps her department is taking to address these high levels of child and family poverty and food insecurity?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
One of the most positive steps that I've seen happen over the last 2 years while we're in government is the investments within the women's community, specifically family resource centres, which had been under-resourced for at least a decade. Every single family resource centre now has at least $75,000 in investment that they have been doing programs like food security, they've been doing financial literacy, they've been doing crisis counseling. I still look forward to the time when the child tax benefit federally works hand in hand with the work that we're doing in benefit reform in Nova Scotia and actually making substantial change for families in Nova Scotia.
The honourable member for Inverness.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister responsible for the Office of the Ombudsman. It has been 21 months since Dwight Bishop retired, and we know the government has advertised for this position. They've had 81 applicants. They held interviews. They even had a successful candidate. But they've held off on hiring, and I'll table that information, Mr. Speaker. My question, why?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's certainly a concern to us as well, and I appreciate the member bringing up that issue, that having an effective ombudsman office is very important. We do have a very good acting ombudsman at the moment, so I'm very confident in the current service that's available. Thank you.
The honourable member for Inverness.
Mr. Speaker, I can appreciate there may be an acting ombudsman, but it puzzles a lot of people. Mr. Speaker, this government said they would be the most transparent province in the country, but it's 2 years later, and we have no full-time ombudsman
Order,
in
please.
place.
Time allotted for oral questions put by members to ministers has expired. We'll now move on to government business. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would you please call public bills for second reading?
We'll now call public bills for second reading.
Speaker, would you please call Bill number 128, Labour Standards Code?
We'll now call Bill number 128, the Labour Standards Code. The Honourable Minister of Labour.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that Bill 128, an act to amend Chapter 246 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Labour Standards Code, be now read a second time. Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotians shouldn't have to worry about what may happen to their job if they call Labour Standards to ask a question or to gather information for themselves or a colleague. The proposed amendment to the Labour Standards Code will clarify and enhance protections for employees who make labour standards inquiries or provide information to labour standards officials. Mr. Speaker, Section 30 of the Labour Standards Code protects employees from employer reprisal for pursuing their labour standards entitlements and/or testifying in a labour standards matter. It's a fundamental protection under the code. But, Mr. Speaker, it was narrowly interpreted recently, and it doesn't plainly articulate the kinds of reprisal situations employees could face. The proposed change will ensure employees are protected in a range of possible reprisal situations. Mr. Speaker, the amendment I tabled last week will clarify and enhance protection for employees who ask about their rights under the code, initiate an investigation or other proceeding like appealing a labour standards decision, make a statement or give information to our labour standards division, ask or require their employer to comply with the code or regulations, help a colleague who is concerned about their employment rights, participate in a proceeding, such as giving testimony, or have shown they intend to take or whom the employer believes will take a leave to which they become entitled. Mr. Speaker, the Labour Standards Code exists to protect workers, and our labour standards team is available to help employees understand their employment rights. If employees are deterred from asking questions about their employment rights or from pursuing the things they're entitled to, then the spirit of the code is defeated. Mr. Speaker, the proposed amendment adds clarity and will make sure employees are protected. Thank you.
The honourable member for Northside Westmount.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's my pleasure to rise and say a few words about this Bill 128 today, amendments to the Labour Standards Code. It's very important that all Nova Scotians, regardless of where they work, are afforded protection under the Labour Standards Code of this province. There are a number of provisions in this bill that appear to be worthwhile. Nova Scotians should not have to worry about their job security if their employer discovers that they have contacted a labour standards official. I am sure that in many cases, employees that contact labour standards officials for no other reason other than to make inquiries, not necessarily to put forward formal complaints. Last year, the Labour Board itself ruled on a case concerning this issue, where an employee was let go because the possibility of an employee contacting the Labour Board was discovered by the employer. It is also true that when there are real concerns regarding an employer's operations that might potentially harm the worker, there should not be any deterrent for Nova Scotians to come forward to express their concerns. One question I do have, though, Mr. Speaker. concerning these amendments would concern the rights of the employers in cases where numerous complaints, which appear to be beyond truth in nature, have been brought forward and dismissed by the Labour Board by an employee over a period of time. I look forward to hearing any commentary on this bill from the presenter law amendments and seeing this bill go there.
The Honourable House Leader for the New Democratic Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I too want to stand in support and our caucus support of this bill moving forward through the process. It's always important to recognize the need to engage legislation that might need to be updated to ensure that individuals and employees have the protection when they make a complaint to the Labour Board, Mr. Speaker. And we know with this change, definitely it will attempt to do that. We know that there had been a complaint to the Labour Board from an employee, which resulted in the firing of that individual, which is not how labour standards and labour standards should be interpreted within our province. So I look forward, as to our caucus, to having this piece of legislation move forward and encourage the government to continue to look at ways to improve labour standards so that we protect employees here in our province, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Atlantic.
Speak on an act to amend Chapter 246 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Labour Standards Code. Mr. Speaker, before I had the privilege of representing the people of Halifax Atlantic, I'd wake up every morning at the crack of dawn, put on my work boots, grab my hard hat, and go to work. Mr. Speaker, I had the privilege to work with a great group of hardworking men and women. We were a family of utility workers. Our work was not glamorous. None of us were getting rich doing what we did, but we gave, and they continue to give, an honest, hard day's work. Our work included working with and beside heavy machinery, working with pipe saws, jackhammers, picks and shovels, just to name a few things. You depended on the person next to you to be well-trained, honest, experienced, and mindful. Mr. Speaker, my years doing the job, this is exactly what I experienced with my co-workers. Co-workers like Jan Michael Kidd, Troy Blackmore, Jason Barkhouse, Jerry McDonald, Graham Hagelin, just to name a few. The member from Pictou East can stand up if he has a problem with my speech. Mr. Speaker, there's another part of the job site that is equally as important as the men and women who work arm in arm with you, and that is a competent employer, one who realizes that their greatest asset is their employees, that they keep their employees up to date in training and the latest technologies, that they put them in safe situations, and that they ensure that they return home to their families and loved ones. Mr. Speaker, the majority of employers in Nova Scotia are fantastic employers that respect their employees and see them as their greatest asset. But, Mr. Speaker, not all employers are created equal. Unfortunately, there are times where employees are put into circumstances where they are uncomfortable, where they question their training and sometimes their safety. The employees of Nova Scotia need to be comfortable with approaching the Department of Labour and Advanced Education without fear of discipline or dismissal from their job. The Minister of Labour and Advanced Education had this to say: Nova Scotians shouldn't have to worry about what might happen to their job if they call labour standards to ask a question or gather information. These changes add clarity and will make sure employees are protected against retaliation by their employer for asking about their employment rights. Mr. Speaker, the proposed amendments will clarify and enhance protection for an employee who initiates an inquiry, investigation, or other proceeding, makes an inquiry about his or her rights under the Code, makes a statement or gives information to labour standard officials, requires the employer to comply with the Code and regulations, helps another employee who's concerned about a possible violation of their rights under the Code, participates in a proceeding, has shown an intention to take or whom the employer believes will take a leave to which they have become entitled. Once again, this government consulted. We consulted with CFIB, Restaurants Canada, Retail Council of Canada, Restaurants Nova Scotia, and the Nova Scotian Federation of Labour. Mr. Speaker, I wanted to take a moment to thank the Minister of Labour and her department for once again looking after one of Nova Scotia's greatest assets, its workers. Thank you.
The honourable member for Pictou East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to rise and speak to this bill today, and I think it is an important bill because I do agree that that employees should always feel comfortable in dealing with their employers, and I think that this bill could have went a bit further to encompass facts where employees disclose sensitive information to their employers, possibly about their health situation. They should always have the confidence that their employers will maintain confidence on issues like that. So this is an example where if employees are concerned and they want to talk to the Labour Standards Board about that, they should feel that they can do that safely. They should also feel that they can have the right to expect their employers to maintain their confidence over other sensitive issues and things that concern them. So I would say that I do look forward to this bill going to the law amendments and hearing what the public has to say about that. But I do anything that will make Nova Scotia a better workplace is something that I support. So with those few words, I'll take my seat. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Found to recognize the Honourable Minister of Labour. It will be to close second reading on Bill number 128, the Labour Standards Code. The Honourable Minister of Labour.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the honourable members for their comments about this particular amendment, and I promise to give the comments of the honourable members the due consideration which their comments deserve. Mr. Speaker, I rise to close debate on Bill 128.
Motion is for second reading of Bill number 128, the Labour Standards Code. Would all those in favour of the motion please say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried.
Bill number 128, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 246 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Labour Standards Code.
Ordered that this bill be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. The Honourable Deputy Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, please call Bill number 129, the Securities Act.
We'll now call Bill number 129, the Securities Act. The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move Bill number 129 be now read a second time. Mr. Speaker, I'm honoured to rise in the House today to speak about Bill 129, which includes amendments to the Securities Act. The amendments in Bill 129 will ensure our legislation remains highly harmonized with securities laws across Canada. Mr. Speaker, these amendments will ensure securities legislation remains modern, up-to-date, and consistent with other Canadian jurisdictions. Specifically, these amendments will support a national initiative called the Point of Sale Disclosure Project, which is in its final stage of being implemented. Mr. Speaker, this initiative is intended to improve disclosure provided to investors or potential investors at the point of sale of investment fund products. These amendments will also support the expansion of filings that can be made using the coordinated passport system. This will reduce the regulatory burden on market participants, consistent with the government's commitment to support the private sector through regulatory excellence and red tape reduction. Finally, Mr. Speaker, these amendments will enhance investor protection by expanding the scope of a number of tools available to the Nova Scotia Securities Commission to conduct its compliance and enforcement activities. These amendments will ensure investors are protected on a consistent basis, will facilitate innovation, reduce regulatory burden through the expanded use of the passport system, and increase national harmonization of security laws. I look forward to hearing what other members of the legislature think of this bill, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
The honourable member for Pictou East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Pleasure to rise today and speak to this bill for a few moments. This bill falls under a provincial, territorial memorandum of understanding regarding securities regulation that was signed back in 2004. And that MOU from that time, it's an agreement between the provinces and the territories to ensure that the investment industries in those areas remain vibrant and competitive while safeguarding the rights of businesses and consumers. And the MOU from that time also points to maintaining low-cost and efficient regulatory infrastructure And 8.3 of the MOU from that time says that options for further reform will be consistent with the original goal of the Provincial Territorial Securities Initiative to develop a provincial territorial framework that inspires investor confidence and supports competitiveness, innovation, and growth through efficient, streamlined, cost-effective securities regulation that's simple to use for investors and other market participants. So emphasis added in that case, Mr. Speaker, to efficient, streamlined, and cost-effective securities regulation. And I know in the minister's opening comments, the minister used the words modern, up-to-date, and consistent with other jurisdictions. But he left a word out, which would have properly described it, parallel. He could have said that our system is parallel to other systems. And that's a bit of a shame to me, Mr. Speaker, because this is a situation where we could be in. We could be in with everyone else as opposed to on the outside running a parallel system that we are using time in this legislature and in the office of the Commissioner and everyone else and the participants using their time to try and make a system that is, in the minister's words, modern, up-to-date, and consistent. So I ask the question, if those are our goals, why are we maintaining a parallel structure? So we are continuing to duplicate the work of a national securities regulator. And why? Why are we continuing to do that? There's no good answer for that, Mr. Speaker. Nova Scotians want to know if we're in with the national regulator or out. And we heard this week that the Premier at a 2-year point, he's very interested at a 2-year point of his government as to who's in and who's out. And we're asking the same question here today of the national securities regulator. Are we in or are we out? And as long as we are out, which certainly seems to be the case, we on this side have been asking questions about this for the last time I asked it in question period was 406 days ago, at which time there was a degree of optimism from the government that they were investing a lot of time understanding the national regulator system and looking at the pros and cons of joining it. 406 days later, another minister later, we are still investing time looking at that system. But we're going one further, Mr. Speaker. We'll actually pass some legislation to buy some more time. And it's a simple question, in or out? And as long as we're out, which we seem to be, as long as we are out, we're duplicating other efforts. We're creating another system of red tape, another layer of bureaucracy, and all of those things have cost. Worse than that, Mr. Speaker, as long as we're out, we are lagging behind those jurisdictions that are in. And we're lagging behind them in terms of regulatory updates because by virtue of the separation, we're always going to be behind them. As long as we stay on our own, we will be behind all of those that are united and together and moving forward. We're always going to be playing catch up. And we are always going to be out of step with the federal practices. And that's because we are separate from them. And I don't, Mr. Speaker, maybe when the minister stands up in his closing comments, he can explain what value this government sees in that. Because the government obviously sees value in maintaining a separate system. At one point we heard that, it's a revenue generator, but I don't think that is an argument that holds water. I think it's a short-sighted argument. We know that the feds had offered a compensation package to provinces that joined. In fact, I think, Mr. Speaker, you may remember, I think it was 5 years' worth of revenue. So, Mr. Speaker, we're just wondering why. And, if we had an answer to the why, That's why today I was wondering, what are the disadvantages? Maybe if we had somebody could shed some light on the disadvantages, well, then maybe we could have a good discussion about that, but still nothing. So maybe we'll start to hear as to why this government is reluctant. They can start to share some of the reluctance, well, then maybe it has merit. We just don't know, you know? We need to have that discussion. So I would look forward to, at closing maybe of second reading later today, hearing some of the reluctance and some of the reasons for the reluctance. And if not, maybe the Law Amendments Committee, when we get to hear from the Nova Scotians, maybe they're going to flood that hall, Mr. Speaker, and come in there in droves to talk about why they're reluctant to the province strain. Maybe there'll be a big mass entry that people should probably phone up now and book their spot to talk about the Law Amendments Committee on the joining of the National Securities Regulator and share with us why they're concerned. Because I haven't come across many Nova Scotians that say, you know what, I have a great idea for us as a province that's progressive and wanting to move forward. I have a great idea. Let's stay out of lockstep with everyone else. Let's not join the norm. Let's stay on our own. And that's essentially what we're hearing here today. We need to be on our own. And if you ask why do we need to be on our own, well, there's no answer. If you ask what are the disadvantages to being on our own, well, there's no answer. You know what the answer is, Mr. Speaker? We're looking at it. We're investigating it. For 406 days just since I started asking. And these questions are from well before my time, Mr. Speaker. But it's 406 days just since I asked. And yet, the research continues. But nothing substantive. Maybe we can dribble a little bit out, maybe in little segments of minute, 2 minutes at a time, and then eventually we'll get to the full story maybe, Mr. Speaker. But for the interim, I'd be happy with the little 1-minute blurb on something, just a snippet out of context or maybe not, just as to what's the reluctance. But I do believe, Mr. Speaker, and you might not have got it from my comments so far, but I do believe that Nova Scotians would be better served by joining the National Securities Regulator, because it would allow businesses to deal with the same regulation across the country, instead of a piecemeal approach endorsed by separate governments. Well, what are we looking at today, Mr. Speaker? More piecemeal, more of an effort to be modern, up to date, and consistent. Catch up. More of an effort to run a parallel system. Why? Why, Mr. Speaker? This government is being faced with a great opportunity to reduce red tape for business. It's a great opportunity to reduce red tape for business and make sure that businesses are dealing with the same regulations all across the country. Well, when faced with an actual opportunity to reduce red tape, what do we see, Mr. Speaker? We see them say, no, we're not going to reduce red tape. In fact, we're going to put another bill through the legislature to talk about how we can keep our own separate system and our own red tape. But, Mr. Speaker, it comes with a promise that they will always endeavor to be consistent and up to date. Mind you, one step behind. So, Mr. Speaker, we bring this bill forward, and we do talk about some efforts in this bill. The passport system may reduce red tape, but in the face of an opportunity to abolish red tape from this area, we go with a plan to possibly reduce some. And that goes back to the 2004 MOU. That's an initiative that was started then in 2004, 13 years ago, Mr. Speaker, 12 years ago, I guess. I don't know, 11 years. I'm a little ahead of my time, maybe. National Securities Regulatory System will provide better and more consistent protection for investors across Canada. Now, that's one of the advantages. That's one of the advantages of the national system, and might not be compelling enough for this government. But you know, maybe there's disadvantages. We don't know, and I'm hopeful. I am still optimistic that we'll hear about some of that today. But I don't think it can be disputed, and I'll be curious if anyone does dispute it, because I really don't see. I really take it as indisputable that having a regulatory body centralized and united would always be a better environment for business. It would be anytime you can provide business with more coherent, consistent reporting regulation, it's better. It's better for the consumers, it's better for the businesses, it's better for everyone. So I do think that that would be a good thing, because it also would help in criminal enforcement to better fight securities-related crime. Now, you can imagine, Mr. Speaker, if you have some securities-related crime, probably some pretty sophisticated crime, and you had our own independent body here trying to take on that investigation, and the national people trying to take on that investigation, you can just see the duplication of effort that would be required there. The national system would allow for faster policy responses that we should be expecting from our regulator, particularly where emerging markets are concerned. And if you have the national body doing that, and the provinces trying to catch up, the ones that are on the out, trying to catch up, these are all questions, Mr. Speaker, for which we haven't seen an answer. And I find it worrisome that it's either one of two things, Mr. Speaker. Either the government doesn't know the answer, or they don't accept the answer. And you know, maybe one of those might be true, and I'd like to hear which one it is. Now, better governance and more efficient business conditions should not be held hostage from increased revenue. And I'm curious if that's what's happening here. We're pushing away those possible improvements because we see a possible revenue stream which we're worried about. And I don't know if that's a good concern, but it's certainly not a good practice. It's very short-sighted practice. And I had been optimistic that this government would have learned from some of its past short-sighted decisions. And members of this House may be familiar with the situation that happened with the film tax credit, Mr. Speaker, where this government circled a line item on the financial statements, the $25 million tax credit, circled that number and said, look, we can save that. We can save $25 million if we just cut that. And we know what happened. Mr. Speaker, is there was a corresponding line item on there that they hadn't considered, and that was the actual benefit of spending that, and it was over $100 million, depending on who you ask, Mr. Speaker. So I worry that this was a case where the government would circle a line item on the financial statements, $15 million from revenue from the securities regulator, and say, we have to keep that. We have to maintain that. And I think it's short-sighted, Mr. Speaker. I think it's short-sighted for a lot of reasons. So I would say, Mr. Speaker, that if this government, if this Liberal government wants to make real change to the economic state of the province, it means that they will need to make it more affordable for businesses. They will need to make it more attractive for businesses to operate here. And, you know, it's going to require some changes. And here we see more of the same with respect to the regulator here. So even that MOU from way back in 2004, Mr. Speaker, even back then, the writers of that MOU understood that we should always be looking for efficiencies. We should always be looking for low-cost options. And it's interesting to me, Mr. Speaker, that was recognized back in 2004 by the writers of the MOU, but here we have the current day Liberal government doesn't recognize those simple principles, and is unwilling to explore ways to achieve those goals of efficiency and low-cost options. So, Mr. Speaker, I would say that if the current government is really interested in modernizing our system and making our system up to date and making it consistent, if that's really what they want to do, then they should heed my advice, which I'm giving so freely to them today. And with those few words, I would take my seat. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Acting Leader of the New Democratic Party.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I won't be taking a great deal of the House's time on Bill 29, but I did want to stand for a few minutes and make a few remarks on these amendments to the Securities Act. Mr. Speaker, in no way do I have any expertise or any great knowledge about securities legislation or law. Not like my former colleague. I found it very interesting listening to his points because I had a very short, narrow window when I was in the finance office when this was a bit of a conversation about whether or not Nova Scotia should join with a national securities commission. And the former federal finance minister, Minister Jim Flaherty, was a huge proponent for a national securities commission. And some of the provinces at that time had signed on, or they certainly were moving in that direction, but some of the smaller provinces were reluctant to move in that direction. And as it was explained to me by government officials in the department and at our local commission, that the benefits of joining a national commission might not, in fact, accrue to the province of Nova Scotia, that they would be minimal. And it was the larger provinces that had much greater activity and stock exchanges, province of Quebec and Ontario, that would see a great benefit. But in fact, because there's such limited activity here in Nova Scotia, that there could be some disadvantages for us. I confess I don't have a great depth of knowledge in this area, and in fact I think this is a very specialized field in terms of securities law. But what I do know is that we do need to have protections. We have seen, for example, the Knowledge House case go on and on, drag on, and I think it's in front of the courts yet. And I ask myself, if we had better regulations and standards and procedures, whether or not these kinds of situations would occur. I know that recently, I believe a prominent member of our finance and business community, Mr. Bill Black, has been appointed to a very important position with respect to these matters, and I'm sure that he would be offering his expertise and his insight and his advice to the government and to probably all members of the House who are interested in these matters and in drawing on that. I don't know whether we'll have the opportunity to see Mr. Black or others of his expertise and knowledge in the Law Amendments Committee speaking to the features of this bill. I hope that if there are people who have concerns and who have insights, who have suggestions for things that we could do to enhance and improve protection for those who are impacted by securities regulations, that they would come forward and help lay people like myself have a better appreciation of the implications so that we can have the best regulatory framework, and a regulatory framework that both protects and also has the flexibility to allow for business opportunities and for businesses to grow and invest in our province. I think that ultimately, unlike the direction of this government, a government that is only interested in damaging and harming economic activity and cutting the public services that can make a great contribution in communities across the province, and doing little to nothing around growing the economy, Mr. Speaker. We need to look at every opportunity that we have to grow the economy in our province. And if in some small way dealing with the regulatory aspects of securities law would help in any way, then I think it's incumbent on us to be open to that and to look at that. So, Mr. Speaker, with those few remarks, I'll take my place.
The honourable member for Cape Breton Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A couple of days ago, I had the opportunity to address the legislature for the first time, and I'm quite happy to get up again and share my few thoughts on this important piece of proposed government legislation. As I mentioned the other day, Mr. Speaker, I have some experience in the business world, and I have been fortunate to have some very successful career over the past 3 decades here in Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, investors in Nova Scotia look to Nova Scotia Securities Commission for confidence and protection in the provincial security markets. The proposed legislation includes amendments to the Securities Act, support harmonization efforts across the country, strengthen protection, and better serve investors. It's important that our province makes these necessary changes to the Securities Act to keep up to date with the legislation in other jurisdictions across Canada. Back in 2004, Nova Scotia committed to work with Canada's 12 other jurisdictions to develop harmonized security laws. Harmonized security laws will benefit all provinces and will benefit Nova Scotians. These efforts are in line with other initiatives we have recently undertaken, such as the Premier's recent collaboration with PEI and New Brunswick to reduce the red tape in the Atlantic region. By working together and align our regulations, we can help each other meet our individual goals faster and more efficiently. These proposed amendments also support expansion of the passport system and other additions related to the implementing the final stage of the point of sale project. This is to ensure that jurisdictions across Canada are expected to adopt similar legislation by spring 2016. On those brief notes, I'll sit down. Mr. Speaker, thank you.
The honourable member for Inverness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I took interest in the passport piece where a company files to have their status changed in the registered province and only pays the fee once. Just a small point, I know that investment advisors have to be registered in each province in which they have a client in, and that cost is somewhere between $300 and $400 per year. And if you have clients in 10 provinces, that's, you know, in the neighborhood of about $3,000 a year. So just a thought that maybe something the government could look at to make life a little easier for the advisors out there. And they're independent business people in most cases. And if there's not a need to be registering in every province, if this same information could be passed around to the other provinces, I think that would be an improvement and something to save these Nova Scotia business people money. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
If I recognize the Honourable Minister of Finance, it will be to close second reading on Bill number 129, the Securities Act. The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank the members who have taken the time to share their thoughts on this piece of legislation with these amendments before they move on to the next process and law amendments, Mr. Speaker. I guess, Mr. Speaker, it was the member from Pictou East who took the most time, shared the most thoughts on this particular set of amendments, although I think, Mr. Speaker, the majority of the time was not actually spent talking about the amendments in this particular bill, but rather about a larger question with respect to whether or not the province of Nova Scotia would enter into the national securities regulation as a member of the National Securities Regulator, Mr. Speaker. Just a quick clarification on a point he made, Mr. Speaker. I believe he said at one point the last time he got up in this House and asked a question was 406 days ago, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to just correct the record that I believe it was only about an hour ago, Mr. Speaker, when he last stood in the House to ask a question about the province joining the National Securities Regulator. Mr. Speaker, to go on to address the question about why and how long, what the status is, I believe whether we are in or out of the national regulator, Mr. Speaker. I believe I answered that question earlier today during question period, but I'll repeat it for the members' benefit again, Mr. Speaker. We are currently not signed on to the National Securities Regulator, Mr. Speaker. And I'd like to, the way that the member opposite had been speaking about the National Securities Regulator, Mr. Speaker, he's been speaking and certainly alluding to the people of Nova Scotia and the members of this legislature, Mr. Speaker, that that is a regulatory body that is up and running and governing regulations for all of those securities commissions that have signed on, Mr. Speaker. That's not exactly accurate, Mr. Speaker. So the suggestions that we are somehow laggards and behind, and that if we didn't move forward with these amendments, Mr. Speaker, that we should, we would alternatively should be part of the National Securities Regulator, Mr. Speaker, that this amendment package, this bill would not be necessary or required, Mr. Speaker, is certainly either misleading or perhaps, Mr. Speaker, the member opposite could take the humility of the member from Dartmouth, Halifax, Needham, that acknowledge that there are a lot of specialized this is a fairly specialized area, Mr. Speaker, in the area of securities regulations. So again, I just want to reiterate that whether we currently were part of the National Securities Regulator, signed on or not, that this work that we would be doing here, Mr. Speaker, in Bill 129 would still be going forward, Mr. Speaker, that these harmonizations would still be needed, while the work of the national government, the federal government, and the provincial bodies that have signed on to the National Securities Regulator, that work would be working in parallel, Mr. Speaker, because the full scope of the National Security Regulator and that system has not yet been established in its entirety, Mr. Speaker. In fact, while the member from Pictou East stressed many times about the 406 days that have elapsed since he perhaps first stood in the House to ask about the province's position on the National Securities Regulator, I'd like to point out to the member opposite that, in fact, the chair of that regulatory body was only appointed in July of this year. In fact, near the end of July, July 23rd or 24th, Mr. Speaker, that a Nova Scotian, Mr. Bill Black, was appointed to chair that regulatory body, Mr. Speaker. Clearly, that organization is still in the early stages of getting established. So, again, the suggestions that the province is somehow laggard, somehow disadvantaged, Mr. Speaker, is not accurate. And I'd like to highlight that since July 24th, Mr. Speaker, about 120 days have lapsed, and over 70 of those days, Mr. Speaker, we were in a federal election, Mr. Speaker, and there's not much opportunity to work and continue the dialogue and the discussion about whether or not our province would enter into that agreement with the federal government during that point in time. So again, I just wanted to clarify with respect to those 400 and some odd days that the member from Pictou East is so concerned about, that we continue our discussions, Mr. Speaker. We'll ensure, with respect to entering the national regulator, that will ensure the interests of Nova Scotians are addressed in any agreement that we would enter into, which would certainly be the case that myself or any of my colleagues would do our appropriate due diligence before entering into any agreements of such. But again, in closing, Mr. Speaker, I would just like to highlight and clarify for the members of the legislature, the members of the public, that the amendments being brought forward in Bill 129, Mr. Speaker, and the question of whether or not we would enter into the National Securities Regulator are separate questions, Mr. Speaker. And, contrary to the member from Pictou East, I certainly wouldn't encourage people who want to come to law amendments to talk about entering into the National Securities Regulator. This bill wouldn't be the point in time to have those discussions because, again, this bill would be moving forward even if we were a signatory already with the National Securities Regulator. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I close debate on Bill 129. Thank you.
Motion is for second reading of Bill number 129, the Securities Act. Would all those in favor of the motion please say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried.
Bill number 129, an act to amend Chapter 418 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Securities Act.
Ordered that this bill be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Speaker. As you will note, our business has moved quite quickly throughout the House today. Our House is scheduled to sit till 6 p.m. This evening. There are a number of members who've advised that they would still like to read some member statements that didn't get to do it earlier. I would ask, with the unanimous consent of the House, if we can revert back to the reading of member statements.
Is it agreed?
Agreed.
I hear one lonely no. The motion is tabled. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Speaker. It would appear the NDP aren't interested in continuing to work today, but so be it. With that, Mr. Speaker, that does conclude the government's business for today. Tomorrow being opposition business, I would call upon the House Leader for the New Democratic Caucus to give the hours in business for tomorrow.
The Honourable House Leader for the New Democratic Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I could comment on work of the House by not answering questions, but I won't go there. So tomorrow, the House hours will be between 1 and 5:30, and after daily routine, our caucus will be calling Bill number 132 and Bill number 111. So I do ask that we rise now to meet again between the hours of 1 and 5:30 tomorrow.
The motion is for the House to adjourn to rise again tomorrow, November 25th, between the hours of 1 p.m. and 5:30 p.m. Would all those in favor of the motion please say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The House now stands adjourned until tomorrow, November 25th at 1 p.m.